Welcome to Justice Beyond the Bench, a podcast by the International Association of Women Judges. I'm Amy Lewis, and in this series, we spotlight women across the global justice sector who are leading efforts to advance gender equality, strengthen judicial systems, and champion inclusive leadership. From courtrooms to communities, we'll hear powerful stories and unpack the strategies shaping women's leadership in law and the judiciary. It's time to go beyond the bench. Today, we're diving deep into a bold new initiative, Global Justice 50/50, an offshoot of the widely respected Global 50/50. This time, the focus is on law, justice, and gender equality. For the past 7 years, Global 50/50 has been a leading voice in advancing gender equality and accountability within global health. Through rigorous research, evidence-informed advocacy, and strategic engagement with key stakeholders, Global 50/50 has driven measurable progress in transparency and institutional change across global health organizations. Now, recognizing the critical role that the law and justice sector plays in shaping gender equality and access to justice worldwide, they're expanding their proven model of research and accountability into a new Global Justice 50/50 initiative. And who better to speak with about this exciting initiative than Govindi Deerasinghe, the lead of Global Justice 50/50 and a key partner in the Women in Leadership in Law Coalition supported by Co-Impact. Govindi is a dedicated legal and human rights advocate with extensive experience in the law and justice sector, particularly in the Global South. Trained as a barrister, she holds an LLM in Public International Law from Queen Mary University of London and an LLB in Law from University College London. Govindi's career spans diverse regions, including East and Southeast Asia, Europe, and Latin America, where she has leveraged her multilingual skills and global perspective to lead advocacy campaigns, educational initiatives, and gender equality projects. Her work emphasizes transitional justice, comparative law, and the reform of legal and political institutions to better represent marginalized groups. She has authored significant reports on women's and children's rights and remains a passionate advocate for minority rights and social justice. I had the distinct pleasure of first working with Govindi last summer as we set out to form a Women in Leadership in Law coalition of Co-Impact partners in Bellagio, Italy. And I'm excited to again be on site with her today in Nairobi, Kenya, for a Pan-African Women in Leadership in Law convening hosted by one of our other Willow Co-Impact partners, Femnet. Thank you so much, Govindi, for joining me today in this special episode of Justice Beyond the Bench, Data-Driven Justice, a conversation with Govindi Deerasinghe and of Global Justice 50/50.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here in this wonderful new platform. We really support podcasts, and I really also want to talk to you in your wonderful level of work that you're doing with IAWJ, and we're so happy to be a part of this entire program.
We're so happy to have you, Govindi. Welcome. So I'm just going to go ahead and start us off. So for those of us who may be unfamiliar with the broader 50/50 model, can you explain the origin of Global Justice 50/50 and how it builds on the impact of Global Health 50/50?
Sure. And for that, I think I might need to go into a little bit of the background of Global Health 50/50. So this stems from academia, right? Academic, rigorous research based on the premise of accountability of what organizations are doing in terms of their commitments, their practice, and their policies as to promoting gender equality and other forms of diversity. Global Health 50/50 has been active for about 7 years. We are, to our own horn, I would say, one of the most trusted accountability mechanisms in that sector. And one might ask, why doesn't this exist in law and justice already? Well, we're here to step up to the plate, and including all of the work that our partners in the Will Coalition also do, we want to provide, again, rigorous, independent, evidence-based research to expose inequality, to drive transparency, and to catalyze real institutional reform at the global level. That's our model in Global Health 50/50, and Global Justice 50/50 is going to take that and run with it when we look at workplace policy, workplace equity, and leadership.
So that's quite the shift from health to the justice sector. So what's happening right now that made Global Health 50/50 reform to Global 50/50 and now take on this new Global Justice 50/50 project?
Yeah, I mean, fair question, right? We already have this proven model, right? I said in health. And we've conceptualized the legal and justice space into these subsectors that overlap in some ways with the health sector, for example, funders, IGOs. And the justice sector, as you well know, is a really profound aspect of people's everyday lives that your layperson, to use the legal terminology, might not recognize as such, right? But
Absolutely.
the lived realities of people that face, whether they're going to work, whether they are accessing their own rights, whether, any form of life in terms of from the start of education to marriage to anything beyond that as well, right? So from the start of your life to the end of your life, the law really makes a difference in governance, in policy. So it's unfortunate that we don't have that level of transparency about the organizations that uphold the rule of law, access to justice, and we're relying on the same type of people at the heads of these institutions to dictate how we live our lives.
Absolutely, yes. And it's an important point that you make about how the law really does touch every facet of our lives. I think sometimes people think of the law as this just courtrooms or these big scary institutions or something that they're completely removed from. But it really is a very personal experience, and everyone is going to touch the law in some way in their life, most likely. But let's talk more about the model. So what does Global Justice 50/50 actually do? How are you gathering and using the data?
Okay, this is the best bit for me, right? Because I'm a real data nerd. The way that our methodology works is that we rely on entirely publicly available information. So our researchers go and look at the websites of the organizations themselves. For our justice sample, there's 172 organizations active across the law and justice sector as we've conceptualized it. So to repeat myself a little bit, that counts the judiciary, IGOs, commissions, and expert mechanisms that go together, INGOs, bar associations, law firms, and funders. So we've got a nice selection of private sector, or I should say for-profit and not-for-profit sectors. And once we've collected the data, which runs across 10 variables, the life cycle of commitments to promoting gender equality, actual implemented workplace policies, and then monitoring and evaluation of sex disaggregated data. We collect all of that information and we score it on a really simple traffic light system, right? So let me take one of those variables, commitment to gender equality. For the commitment, we look for language that uses the words gender equality, gender diversity, or gender mainstreaming. And it's a simple commitment, right? So a green is where you've expressed that strong commitment to promoting whatever equality, diversity, mainstreaming. Amber would be some mention of gender equality, social justice, human rights, but no explicit promotion of it. And red would be nothing at all, right? And the way that we put the sample together is that all of these institutions do actually play some sort of role in the broader sense in that law and justice space. Then let's take a slightly more nuanced one like the workplace policies, right? So we have two variables there. Variable that asks, is there a policy that promotes gender equality in the workplace, right? And for that, green is a little bit more stringent, shall I say, in that it looks for not just commitments, but also explicit measurable mechanisms. That could be as simple as quotas, but in the legal space, right, that could be mandated. There shall be consideration of gender equality, right? And then we have other ones on is beyond gender equality. Are there other policies that promote diversity, like disability, for example? So those buckets are the data that we collect, and then we share it with the organizations themselves for 2 rounds of validation. During this period, they have the opportunity to come back to us and say, yes, we agree with the score you've given us, or actually, we have these other policies, and we would like you to consider those and rescore. And then we review that, any proposed amendments, give it back to them for the final review, and we close the data set after that. And then that snapshot, and I really, really want to emphasize that it's just a snapshot, right? Because we also have leadership data, who's at the heads of these organizations. And that's what ends up being produced in our report and our index. The index will name each organization and against each of the 10 variables, what they've scored, green, amber, or red. The leadership scoring is slightly different. It just measures, is this a woman at the top, a man at the top, or any other non-binary identifier of gender. I can say already for the law and justice space that it's just binary.
Yeah.
The leaders that we have.
Shocking, I know. So you said that this relies on publicly available data. So what if, say, a judiciary, right, they are a bit lock and key sometimes, comes to you and says, well, actually, we do have a policy, we just don't have it published. What do you do in those instances?
This happens quite frequently, and the basis is solid. We believe in accountability and transparency most of all, because if you think about it from who we're trying to reach, right? Yes, there are the decision makers that we want to influence to change their policies so that there are fairer practices in place so that more people of all diverse markers can make it to the top and succeed and then bring everyone else up with them. But we also want to look at it from the bottom up way, right? So imagine you're an individual that is starting your career in law and justice as a lawyer that might want to, well, let's say a law graduate, right? You're thinking, I want to make my way up the ranks in a law firm and then maybe let's say, go into criminal law and then work myself up. I'm talking very much about the British system now because that's where I'm from. But then I want to, be a barrister, practice, and be really successful and then make my way up to being a judge, right? Then you want to know that once you're in that system, there's going to be these mechanisms in place to support you and to account for all of the lived realities that you're experiencing as a baby barrister, right?
Yes.
As an individual in your own right. So we also want them to be able to see, this is the data that we've collected and produced, but that individual can also go and look on the website of the institution that they care about, and they can find the same policy. Right?
Absolutely.
Transparency is key.
Yeah. And you've talked a lot about transparency and accountability, right? And we know that data alone doesn't shift power, but data with that accountability does. So is the idea here maybe to shine a light on those disparities and hope that that light leads to change? Or can you share a little bit about the impact that you hope to see from this or what success might look like?
Absolutely. Let me give you some examples of things that have worked really well in health, right? We've never been about calling people out. We want to work in a collaborative, iterative process with the organizations in our sample, as well as other key stakeholders. And our reports in health have generated certain measurable impacts that we hope to basically recreate in justice. So for example, 1 year, one of the organizations in the sample was Swedish CEDA. They're a funder, big funder, right? And several other organizations in the sample that were funded by Swedish CEDA were performing relatively badly against our scores, against the variables. So CEDA wrote to those organizations and demanded a management response.
Oh, wow.
So that's one example. Actually, there's quite a few, right? Let me give them all up.
Yes, yes.
Then we also sometimes do thematic reports, right? So we also had one SRHR report, which identified that of the 200 or so organizations in health, only one had a menstrual leave policy and only one had a menopause policy.
Wow.
Numbers are pretty shocking anyway for organizations working in public health, right? But the success story is that those two organizations talk to each other and swap their policies.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Amazing, right? And then another thing is that we have actually is a self-assessment tool on our website. So especially in the collective action space, right? If a lot of young women have come and spoken to us to say that, well, the report's been really clear and insightful and had these amazing data points, but actually our organization is not in the sample. What we have done is taken the self-assessment tool, taken the results to our management and demanded change.
Wow.
So we also want to empower people that way. And, we're just starting out in law and justice, but these are the things we will have. We'll have the repository of policies, of best practice policies, like we had for the menopause and the menstrual leave policy, amongst other things, right? When we find good examples, we just publish them so that it's easily accessible to all that want to find it. And we'll have a self-assessment tool. We'll have the index so that people can see how these subsectors are performing, right? Maybe generate some healthy competition, let's say.
Well, we know how much lawyers love to compete, so that tracks. But you said that sometimes they'll self-assess and then take that and use that as a mechanism for change. What if there's an organization that wasn't originally included in the sample? Is there a way for them to be like, wait, we're really great, include us too?
Oh, it's happened before. People ask us to be included, and yeah, you're always welcome, right? Capacity for research is always the problem with institutions like us, right? But it's not too difficult, especially when an organization's already meeting us at that point of engagement. I think one of the harder things is, especially for validation, making sure that we have that relationship with those organizations. And again, reiterating that it's a collaborative effort. Calling you in forms the best practice, you know?
Yeah, and you've touched on this a couple times, that this work, it is deeply collaborative, right? Not just from your global justice 50-50 or broader global 50-50 perspective, but as I mentioned earlier, you're on site here with me in Nairobi because we're at a Pan-African Women in Leadership and Law convening hosted by FemNet. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more what your partnership with the Willow Coalition is, which brings together legal leaders from across the global south to drive systemic change. But how does Global Justice 50-50 see its role in shifting the current narratives about women in leadership and law?
Really good question, right? Because we are in a very much complementary position. We ourselves are not the drivers of advocacy as such. We bring the data. You know you can trust our reports and our index. So with all these brilliant partners who work in different intersecting but quite niche platforms and with different audiences and different networks, we're providing the data that you can take and run with, right? There's a lot of analysis to be made with that data, and you can also use it sort of as benchmarking. So in the way that I talked about best practices, you mentioned that this is bringing also together leaders in the global south, right? Unfortunately, as again, might not be that surprising, a lot of these organizations holding power are predominantly North American, Europe-based, right? However, we see great policies coming out of places and relevant to this current convening, the African Court, the African Commission, right? So we also have to remember that fairness and equity is spoken about in different ways in different regions, and bringing those people together by having that comparison is also quite important. And in that sense, we get to reshape the conversation and also give agency to those who are actually affected by those policies, whose working lives are shaped by the organizations, and actually not just working lives, as we were talking about earlier, your everyday lives.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that's really come out of this convening and that we talk about a lot as feminists, right, is the personal is political. And we know that it's not always just about the numbers, right? And there's quantitative data, there's qualitative data, but this is indeed, about sparking that kind of global conversation on how to make justice systems or the law and justice sector more equitable, transparent, inclusive. And with your first kind of report coming out, your Global Gender and Justice Report and Index is set for release in October 2025,
yes.
Right? So what can we kind of expect from this, dare I say, landmark publication?
Yeah, it's going to be, a really, I would say, good entry point, right? It's a snapshot of a really comprehensive evidence-based assessment of gender equality in the global justice sector. The leadership variables I think a lot of people might be interested in. And let me give you another little data point from health, right? And this is going to be reflected in justice for sure. But as well as whether the leaders at the top are men or women or identifying as non-binary, we also look at where their nationality, right? And where they were educated last, the country of highest education. Any guesses in terms of aggregate reporting?
Country of highest education or, oh, wow.
And there is a single one.
I mean,
that relates to this data point, not that there's one single.
I'm a little bit wondering if it's the UK, but I'm probably biased because I'm talking to someone from the UK.
Perhaps, but you're not too far off, right? So this was a few years ago, actually, this report. But we found that the leaders of these organizations, right, 8% of them were educated in universities from the global south, right?
Okay.
Which means 92% in the global north.
Yeah.
And 8% of that, Harvard.
Of course.
Huge overrepresentation, right?
That is huge. Yes.
Crazy. So already we're seeing with the data that we've collected, right, in justice, it is overwhelmingly male. It is overwhelmingly that they're based or educated in global north. There's some more nuanced analysis to be made there, and I will leave it there so that your listeners will actually come and read the report.
Oh, we definitely want, I mean, I'm so excited for this report to come out. I mean, I may be a little bit biased because I'm in this sector, but I think this is all very exciting. And we're looking forward to learning more and actually having that data that we can continue to use to drive that institutional change, right? Like we talk about that a lot about evidence-based policymaking, data-driven justice, and how we can use that in the justice sector across the globe. You know, you and I work both a lot in the global south, but like, how can we kind of translate that and take some of these learnings from maybe more of the global north, but like you said, more benchmarking best practices. But can you tease us a little bit and share any initial findings?
Sure. Let me think. Okay. Let me go by subsector, actually.
Okay.
So we also do this thing where we categorize organizations based on how many greens, ambers, or reds they've scored across the 10 variables, right? So this goes from very high performer, so on, until very low performers. For your subsector, let's just say there's not a single court or adjudicatory body, to be expansive, that scored in the very high performer range and overwhelmingly in the very low performer.
Wow. Okay, well, it's going to be really interesting to see what that looks like and what we can do, right? Like this data is information. This data helps us drive change. So where we see that maybe we're not scoring as well as we want to, that just means there's room for intervention and gives us an idea of what those interventions need to be. But can you tell us more maybe like what follows the publication, or how can people kind of stay connected, especially those in the legal profession or justice reform spaces? How can they stay connected with this report? I'm assuming it's going to be annual.
So actually, at the moment, we're planning a biannual.
Biannual, okay.
This year, we'll do a global report. Next year, will be a country-level report where we'll delve a little bit deeper into as an as yet undecided country. But back to your first part of your question. I know we said that data is the bread and butter, but actually engagement is really the core part of our work. So the publication is just the start, right? We come out all guns blazing and say, this is what the sector currently looks like. And then we want to engage the organizations, not just in the sample, but those that exist in that ecosystem, right? Like I said, funders play a huge role. Then the feeders, right? The law firms going into the judiciary, working with the academia, for example. Academia is not in our sample for many reasons, but law school graduates care about all of these other places. And like the self-assessment framework, like the policy repository, we want to facilitate dialogue across the sector between organizations, build on the policy, best practice policy, and inviting from here on, everybody that considers themselves part of the law and justice sector. That doesn't mean you have to be a lawyer, obviously.
Not at all.
To join the movement, right? Our tagline is advancing gender justice. And the campaign and the coalition is about women's leadership in law, but Global 50/50 looks at gender as a broad spectrum.
Absolutely.
So there are differences in the issues of access to justice faced by different people, and we want to make sure that fair and equitable policy is what's actually being driven, and the outcomes, of course, are the final measure, which is a little bit more difficult, but engagement is that key.
I love that you're talking about engagement, and I love that you were kind of talking about that pipeline too, where like either law students or early career professionals, but particularly for women, I'm wondering if there are any insights that are emerging from this initiative that you can kind of share for those who may be entering the legal field or aspiring to leadership. What guidance could they maybe take from this report or this movement as they navigate those institutions?
I think the easy thing, and you and I know this already, but it does need to be reiterated, speaking to the early career professionals, the law students, know that the barriers you face are real, but they're not your fault. These are systemic issues that we're facing.
Absolutely.
Right. The challenge isn't that women lack ambition or capability. It's that the institutions themselves weren't designed with gender equality in mind. Some of those policies or commitments we're finding are from the last century, way back when. Yeah? The world looks different now. The world looks different in different places. And counter to that, don't forget and don't underestimate the power of solidarity, of data, and of voice.
Absolutely. We talk a lot about voice, agency, of course, solidarity at IWJ, right? But I think it really comes down to what you said, that women are already skilled, credentialed, capable, confident, just as much, if not more so, as their male counterparts. And it really is about institutional system level change. How do we create institutions that weren't designed with women in mind, but create some enabling environments for them to rise and thrive within those institutions? Well, Govindi, I do have one final question for you that we ask all of our guests, but in one word, what do you believe will have the greatest impact on advancing women's leadership in law?
Care.
Care.
Would you like me to expand?
I would love for you to expand.
We've talked about this at different points that we've also interacted, right? And I think it came up when we had our first coalition get-together, let's say, brainstorming in Bellagio last year. It came up again today a lot in the first day of the Pan-African Women in Law convening as well. It's that, and a lot of times for women it's spoken about as childcare, but actually care is much wider than that. You might be talking about care for your parents, care for people with disabilities, for example. But those are the things that need to be accounted for in the workplace so that, like flexible working policies, for example, so that people can be the best that they can bring and that there's a diversity of voices and of thought and everyone has the chance to succeed.
Absolutely. And care isn't just for women either, right?
No.
This is not just a women's issue. As we spoke about today, everyone is men, women, and everyone on the gender spectrum can be a parent. So, and care isn't just about parenting either, as we know, but that I love that you use that. And you're the first one, so.
I didn't want to be quite unique in that sense.
Well, we're so deeply grateful to you, Govindi, for joining us today and sharing your insight, vision, and obvious deep commitment to holding justice systems accountable. It's clear that Global 50/50 and the global justice movement is not only filling a critical data and accountability gap, but it's also igniting a movement grounded in transparency, collaboration, and structural reform. Govindi, it's just been such a pleasure to work alongside you through the Women in Leadership in Law Coalition from Bellagio to Nairobi. And your clarity of purpose, your ability to navigate both the technical and the transformational, and your tireless advocacy for gender equality and the legal profession continue to inspire me, and I know so many others in this space. And as you so powerfully said, it's not just about the data, it's not just about the numbers, it's about using that to engage and to drive action and shift narratives and ensure that justice truly reflects the diversity and dignity of those that it's meant to serve. So thank you again for joining us, Govindi.
It's a pleasure. It's been an honor. And what a wonderful way to summarize that really great conversation. We have the utmost respect for your work and look forward to a long, fruitful, fun relationship going on.
We'll be collaborating. Don't worry. Well, thanks again for joining us, and thank you again, Govindi. Thank you for tuning into Justice Beyond the Bench. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Want to learn more about our work and support our mission? Visit us at iawj.org, where you can explore our programs, join our global network, or make a donation to help advance gender equity in judiciaries around the world. See you next time.